So hi everybody. I'm delighted to be joined by Alan Zucker, who is going to be talking to us about agile leadership. Alan, welcome to you. Before we start, would you just give my students just a bit of a background about you and your career?
Love to. So I've got over 25 years of experience managing projects and project management organizations in Fortune 100 companies and the federal government. You can see in the back corner there is my seal from the United States Department of Treasury and some bills that were signed by both the Treasurer and the Secretary of the Treasury. So I spent 5 years at Treasury, and actually my master's degree is in economics. And so my first job was, or one of my first jobs was managing the Treasury security auctions. And in the wake of the Salomon Brothers bidding scandal in 91, I believe it was, I was Treasury's project manager to work with the Fed New York to automate the auctions. Little did I know it then, but we actually used agile techniques. And I got involved, that was my first foray into technology, loved it so much that I then moved on to work at MCI Communications. I spent 14 years there. And again, that was a very agile environment. I managed the financial reporting systems for the consumer business unit. So it's, we were billing about $1 billion a month through my systems. And then after that, I spent 11 years at Fannie Mae, and I was managing large programs there, and then a director of project management there. Had about 175 project managers working for me and played a role in the lean agile transformation at Fannie Mae.
Wow.
Oh, and for the last, in the last 5 years, I've been, I decided that I wanted to do something different. And now I do a lot of instruction. I do, standard PMP and project management training. I do a lot of agile training. I'm, my certification, Scaled Agile, Discipline Agile, and Scrum.
Okay. Well, you're definitely the right man to talk to about this whole topic. So, Alan, this week we're looking at agile leadership. And if I could put that first question to you, a simple question, so we're sort of defining our terms. What is agile?
So really interesting, because agile, the core definition of agile is a way of delivering software faster. The Agile Manifesto was put together in 2001, and it was really around software. But the roots of agile really go back, 60 years to lean manufacturing and Toyota, and it really embraces a lot of what I would just refer to as modern management ideas, techniques. The ideas around pushing responsibility down to the lowest level, incremental and iterative delivery, continuous improvement. So what we're seeing now is, agile practices, lean practices are being used in places well beyond software. And it's really a very interesting dynamic time for that.
Alan, one of the things that is clear when you look at agile is there's a distinction between the agile mindset and the agile methodology, and it's often suggested that the mindset is a very important precursor to being able to apply the methodology. Can you explain a little bit further that the agile mindset versus the agile methodology?
And actually, I'm actually a very strong believer that agile is more about mindset versus methodology. I mean, I was doing agile practices both when I was at Treasury, when I was at MCI, well before agile was coined, and well before Scrum, or Scrum being the predominant methodology, was really being articulated. And really, when we think about the mindset, I think there's a couple of key things. One is the idea of doing iterative and incremental development. Incremental is we're delivering in small phases. Iterative is recognizing that we're not going to get it right the first time through, so we're constantly improving. And actually, one of the presentations, one of the talks I give, I actually have a picture of my son when he was about 8 years old down at the beach with a bunch of other kids building a sandcastle. And I use that as an example of how Agile really is how we learn to organize and do work as kids. You know, you go out to the beach, watch kids building a sandcastle. There's no boss. You know, no one wants to be the president of Sandcastle Inc. Self-organized, which is another key component. Hey, you want to go build a sandcastle? Come on around. And they're building, and they'll say, hey, what do you think of this? And they'll be like, I don't like it. They'll knock it down. They'll start all over. And so Agile really encompasses a lot of that in terms of how we build. So iterative and incremental development. But I think more importantly, in terms of the mindset, is that we don't have this sort of top-down command and control leadership or management. One of the key principles is, we use the term self-organizing teams, self-managing teams, semi-autonomous teams. And I think those are really hard for a lot of us to wrap our heads around. But what I think a better way of describing that is that people are empowered to do the jobs and find the best way of getting the job done. And at any level in the organization. An example is when I was in telecom, I was the senior manager of a group. Our group had managed about 24 different applications. And my project managers made lots of decisions. And at a certain point, my IT group was outsourced. And a couple of months later, they're like, Alan, you're the senior manager of the group. You need to approve the requirements. You need to approve the deployments. I'm like, why? I don't know any better than my project managers if these are good requirements or if we've done sufficient testing and the application's ready to go into production. He's like, no, I'm not going to do it. And I didn't. And everything was just fine.
So, Alan, one of the things that we're looking at in this course is perhaps how leadership has changed in the age of technology, and so looking at Agile as such a dominant method of project management, and considering that many of my students will work in that engineering environment, where is the leadership in Agile? What are perhaps the leadership positions? What does leadership in Agile look like?
So I think that leadership in any environment, I mean, Agile, non-Agile, is good leaders set the tone, set the direction, set the strategy, and create the culture. And I think that's really the big thing that we need our leaders to do. We need our leaders to set the culture and really believe in the culture that they're setting. There's a financial services company here in the DC area that has been on its Agile road for at least a decade now. And their practices aren't bad. The practices are probably pretty good. But the problem is that it still has a very top-down, micromanaging kind of culture. And until it begins to break that culture, it's still going to struggle in terms of being agile. And it's really interesting in terms of agile culture. I was really blessed with my career. And when I was working at the Treasury Department, I was working for a small bureau. It was then the Bureau of the Public Debt. It's now part of the Fiscal Services. And I was not even 30 yet, and I was managing the Treasury securities auctions. And my boss said, Alan, you'll be the project manager working with the Fed in New York. And I was making huge decisions and given a huge amount of autonomy to manage these really critical things for the country. And at the time, I was like, wow, why are they trusting me to do all of this? But it really was the culture that bureau, that agency had. And it was a wonderful place.
Alan, one of the things that you've mentioned just a little bit earlier is that agile operates on the basis of self-organizing or self-managed teams. Does that require a different style of management from the leadership? If a team is self-organizing, what then is the role of the leader?
So the role of the leader, if you have a self-organizing, self-managing team, I think is, a couple things. One, create the culture. Two, be there to support and to protect the team. And three is to grow the team and to grow the leaders within the team. Um, you know, I learned, I learned, actually tripped upon the fact that I could not know everything that my organizations or my teams were doing. And at a certain point, I didn't even try. And so, a tangible example of that is, so when I was managing my large project management organization, so I had 150 project managers, we're executing, 125 projects at any given time, 500 projects a year. I had about a dozen managers reporting to me. And I was like, look, each of my managers, you have a pretty good sized business. Each of the portfolios probably had, anywhere from 2 to 20 million or $3 to 20 million a year in development funding. So you've got a good sized business that you're responsible for. I can't keep track of 125 projects. I don't even want to. And so the expectation I established with them is, look, before something goes sideways, let me know, so we can work on it. We can think of the best way to address or solve the problem. And so I think that's an example of how a leader creates the right environment. They give the power, they give the responsibility, they give the ownership to their teams, and then they're there for the support. I think a big component of that is also recognizing that no one goes to work thinking, how am I going to screw up today? Mistakes happen, errors happen. We thought something was going to go one way, it didn't. And when that occurs, good leaders use that as a learning opportunity. Because if you punish people for making mistakes, they'll just hide the mistakes.
Alan, one of the leadership styles that is quite frequently associated with Agile is that of servant leadership. Is that a view that you would subscribe to?
The words we hear people talk about: servant leadership, facilitative leadership. And I think a lot of people, and myself, I know those are the words we use. And I struggle with that sometimes, just in terms of the labeling, because I don't think it's really clear. But when we think about people that are servant leaders, we're really thinking about people that put their teams first. And I think, the example I gave is a way that we can be a servant leader. One of the other things is servant leaders spend a lot of time asking versus telling. Did you consider this? What would be the other options that we could do? And so it's sort of, the difference between being a consultant and a coach. Consultants tell people what to do. Coaches help people find the answer. So I think, that's, another major difference between, sort of the traditional leadership styles and the newer leadership styles.
One of the things that you touched upon a little bit earlier, Alan, as well, was the fact that Agile is disseminating out from just software into HR and marketing and a number of other domains as well. Where do you see Agile going? What do you think are what does the future hold for Agile and Agile leadership?
I think that the potential for Agile is actually limitless. Um, I've worked with, for example, I've worked with nonprofit organizations and have used Agile practices to help them be better. And it's simple stuff. It's establishing ground rules and norms. It's about creating a Kanban board or planning boards, Kanban boards as a way for people to track the work or the programs that they're executing. It's, adopting ideas like daily stand-ups or, whenever the boards would get together, adopting the rules of a stand-up. What are we doing? Or what did we complete? What's coming up? And what are the impediments or blockers? And it's been amazing to see it, expand out and work well in nonprofits. My son-in-law is a construction project manager. He has his undergraduate degree in construction project management from Virginia Tech, and he's building, big buildings down in DC. And I've shared with him how to use, some of the visual project management tools that we use in Agile, even when you're building an office building and an apartment building, and it's really exciting. I actually just yesterday completed putting together a online course on Agile Beyond IT, and it's all about how do we reinterpret, the Agile Manifesto, the principles, applying the principles of the House of Lean. How do we use the practices that we have in Agile and applying them beyond the technology realm? Because I think they are applicable almost anywhere. It just crossed my mind. There's a video that I love to show in class. It was a Bloomberg video where they talk about Toyota. And one of the last scenes is they talk about how a hospital in Canada adopted lean principles to manage the flow of patients through the ER. I mean, talk about a non-traditional place to adopt Agile.
Final question, Alan. The pandemic kind of accelerated a number of trends, and Agile will not have been alone in having to adapt to this. But what is your view in terms of perhaps how remote leadership has had to evolve in the face of the pandemic, and perhaps your experience as well in terms of global virtual teams? How does leadership need to adapt in circumstances like that?
So that's a big one to unpack. Your statement about the pandemic has really it's been interesting. I think prior to the pandemic, State of Agile report, about 75% of teams were Agile. I think it jumped up to 85 in like 2 years. So that was a really big jump. I think that virtual teams, or I think the last 2 years have been a very interesting experiment in terms of remote and virtual working. I think what we have found is that we are pretty darn good at doing our work, basic execution of work. The challenge that I think we find, and I talk to a lot of people, is the softer side of the relationships that we have in work we haven't been able to maintain that. I'm talking about innovation, creativity, collaboration, the serendipitous conversations that we have by bumping into somebody at the in the cafeteria, in the hallway, the chit chat before and after meetings. Those are the hard things to figure out how to reconnect. And I think that's really going to be a tough one because, anthropologically, we've been used to engaging face to face and in person for, tens or hundreds of thousands of years. And, Zoom is great. The online collaboration tools are great, but there's something in terms of that relationship which is where the magic happens, that is really hard to replicate in the virtual environment. So I think, it will be interesting. It will be interesting to see what happens over, say, the next 2 years or 5 years as we look at companies that, choose, post pandemic, or or post the spike of the virus, the companies that choose to remain remote versus the companies that choose to go back to have people in person. And I think it'll be really interesting to see where those companies are in, say, 3 to 5 years, and whether or not those differences, or how those different environments may impact the outcomes, and just the robustness of those organizations.
Alan Zucker, Agile expert, thank you very much for giving us your time and your experience today. It really is appreciated.
It was my pleasure, and thank you for inviting me to speak and share with your class.